Hey guys, tonight we travel to the soft golden hills of late medieval Spain, where the wind carries both the call to prayer and the distant clang of steel boots. You wander beneath the citrus trees of the Alhambra, the palace fortress of Granada, as the last great Muslim kingdom in Europe stands poised on the edge of vanishing. The air is thick with orange blossom and uncertainty. Lamps flicker behind lattice windows, scholars whisper hurriedly in the libraries, and the Sultan's court debates if tomorrow they'll still rule this sun-drenched land. You probably won't survive this era, to be honest, unless you're fluent in diplomacy, swordplay, and 3 different religious customs. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the lion courts of Alhambra, where stone lions spout water that's still cool and sweet despite the Andalusian sun. It's the year 1490, give or take a few months, and you're in the last outpost of Muslim rule in Western Europe. For nearly 800 years, from the 700s onward, much of Iberia had been shaped by Islamic dynasties that brought libraries, architectural marvels, fragrant gardens, algebra, and more citrus trees than anyone asked for. But now, Granada stands alone, surrounded by Catholic kingdoms that are rapidly swallowing up what remains. The city itself remains astonishing. From afar, its red stone walls rise like a mirage out of olive groves. Inside, the Alhambra's mosaic halls glow in the sunlight, and everywhere you go, there's a hush, as if the palace is listening. By day, poets compose riddles along the colonnades. By night, astrologers trace destiny in the stars. But something is cracking beneath the beauty. The people are restless. The merchants still weigh spices in brass bowls and hawk silks imported from Tunis and Cairo, but buyers are fewer, and news from the north grows grimmer. The Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, have united their forces, and their eyes gleam with ambition. You feel it in the air, the slow, sick certainty of an ending. There's a quiet desperation in the way nobles clasp each other's arms and murmur reassurances, in the way beggars no longer shout but stare. The city is full of spies, Castilian agents disguised as traders, Christian conversos who switch sides with whichever way the wind blows, and even Muslim informants disillusioned with the Nasrid dynasty. You duck past a colonnade just in time to overhear a scholar mutter that the Sultan's court is split in 2. Some urge resistance, others surrender. And Sultan Mohammed XII, better known as Boabdil, is young, hesitant, and plagued by poor timing and worse advisors. The scent of roasted lamb drifts through the side alleys, mingling with incense and sweat. In the palace kitchens, the cooks still prepare lavish feasts, but the ingredients are thinner, less saffron, fewer almonds, and no new shipments from the east. You overhear a servant whisper, "There's a war coming and we're decorating pillows." He's not wrong. Outside the city walls, strange silhouettes move in the hills. The Catholic armies have not yet attacked, but they have made their presence known. Fortresses taken, towns besieged, bribes offered to Muslim chieftains just desperate enough to betray their neighbours. The court astrologers try to soothe nerves by saying Mars is not yet ascendant. Historians still argue whether these astrologers genuinely believed their own predictions, or simply knew that sometimes hope was the only thing keeping a city from collapse. Meanwhile, a quieter tragedy unfolds among the everyday citizens. Children are told not to speak Arabic too loudly. Mothers teach them Latin prayers, just in case. At night, some pray for a miracle, others pray for an escape. You pass a spice merchant who buries his best wares behind his shop saying, "If the Christians come, I'll pretend I'm poor." A blacksmith shrugs and says he'll work for whoever wins. But even the loyalists, the ones who believe Granada can resist, speak with a tinge of fear. No matter how thick the walls of Alhambra, they cannot block cannon fire forever. And the Christians have cannons. The Sultan himself, Boabdil, stays mostly hidden from public view. Some days you hear his court musicians still pluck their ouds and sing poems about past victories. Other days, silence falls over the palace like dust. He inherited the throne in chaotic circumstances, deposed his own father, lost the city briefly to a rival, uncle, and regained it, barely. His nickname among Castilians is El Rey Chico, the Little King. Whether out of pity or mockery, no one's quite sure, but Boabdil faces an impossible task: to defend an isolated kingdom while navigating betrayal from within and siege from without. You can't help but sympathize. He didn't ask to be history's final act. And yet, here he is, dragging a battered empire behind him like an overstuffed cloak. The scholars of Granada still debate law, poetry, and medicine in their smoky chambers, though even they have started wrapping scrolls in oilcloth, preparing to hide them in secret walls, or, if all else fails, burn them themselves to prevent them from falling into Christian hands. One scribe, you hear, has already swallowed pages of forbidden philosophy soaked in honey, trusting his stomach to protect Plato. The whispers grow louder. The Christians are marching. Ferdinand offers surrender, but at a price. Isabella demands conversion. The palace guards now check every letter twice, and anyone seen near the walls after dark is detained. The old dream of coexistence, the convivencia, has frayed beyond recognition. Once, Jews, Muslims, and Christians had shared cities, marketplaces, and even poetry competitions. Now each community looks inward, closing ranks. And yet in all this anxiety, Granada still breathes. The gardens bloom, the fountains still flow, the city refuses to believe its own obituary. Even the pigeons seem unaware that history has begun folding in its wings. You pause beside a tile mosaic, tracing your fingers over the Kufic script embedded in the walls. It reads, Wala Ghalib Illallah. There is no victor but God. The phrase is carved throughout the palace, repeated like a prayer, a reminder, or perhaps a denial. The Sultan believes it. The guards chant it. The cooks mutter it over boiling stews, but belief cannot stop cannons. A fringe tale you hear, told by a drunk court jester with a remarkable memory for palace gossip, claims that the Sultan's astrologers once advised him to never look directly west on a Friday, lest he see his kingdom's doom reflected in the fading sun. Is it true? Maybe not, but it says something about the mood. Everyone is looking for signs. Clouds shaped like lions, dreams of bleeding swords, fig trees that bloom out of season. You can't blame them. When your civilization has lasted centuries and now teeters on the brink, you either laugh, pray, or pack. And some are doing all three as you drift through the city streets one last time before sunset. A child runs past you clutching a wooden sword. "I'm Boabdil," he shouts. "I surrender to no one." His father chuckles nervously and shushes him. You watch the boy disappear around a corner and wonder how long that name will even be remembered. You wake the next morning in the shadows of said fortress walls and the faint scent of crushed mint leaves lingering under your nose, only to find that the palace has grown even quieter overnight, as if the stones themselves are bracing for a verdict they already know. Inside the echoing halls of the Alhambra, Sultan Boabdil paces, like a man walking the length of his own future tomb, the train of his robe collecting dust that no servant bothers to sweep anymore. And you follow his steps past walls etched with Arabic calligraphy, praising long-dead caliphs and glorious victories no one can quite recall anymore. He is young, not yet 30, but his eyes carry generations of exhaustion and a kind of premature regret that no tutor or vizier can help him shake. He inherited this crown the way some people inherit debts, heavily, reluctantly, and with an uncanny sense that every move he makes is already doomed to be written in someone else's triumphant version of history. His mother, Axa, once told him coldly, "Better to be buried beneath the stones of Granada than hand it over to the infidels," and ever since then Boabdil has worn the crown like a shackle, more burden than blessing. But dynastic politics in Granada were never simple, not even in quieter years, and this final act of the Nasrid dynasty is particularly tangled. You see, Boabdil didn't just inherit a troubled throne, he snatched it from his father, Abul Hassan Ali, who in turn had seized it in defiance of palace tradition, and in the process sparked an almost Shakespearean family feud. There was blood, backroom deals, and lots of very awkward feasts. Boabdil's uncle, Muhammad Thin, called El Zagal by the Christians, meaning the valiant, also laid claim to the crown and even ruled parts of the kingdom briefly in open opposition to his nephew. The result? Granada's final years were less about defending against the Christians and more about watching Muslim princes undermine each other in increasingly creative ways, including one rumour you overhear about a poisoned pomegranate served with great ceremony and side-eye. Historians still argue whether Boabdil truly intended to reclaim all of Al-Andalus, or whether he'd already accepted that he'd be its undertaker, smoothing the dying empire's final sheets. But ambition lingers in his court even now. You listen as his advisors whisper late into the night, debating whether to sue for peace again, to surrender the city in exchange for protection and dignity, or to fight one last glorious war they cannot possibly win. Boabdil listens, nods, and then does what he often does. Nothing decisive. Some call it caution, others call it cowardice. Either way, the weight of centuries seems to hang heavier on his shoulders than on any sword. You pass through the royal gardens where his mother Aixa often walks, veiled and silent, a living ghost from a fiercer age. She despises her son's compromises, his hesitations, his softness, and once even said aloud during a court session, "You cry like a woman for what you could not defend like a man." Oof! You didn't have to be there to feel that burn echo through history. Boabdil's court tries to carry on as if the end isn't coming, but you can see the strain. The poets still write verses praising his wisdom, but now their metaphors are about falling leaves and weeping rivers. The cooks still prepare feasts, but fewer guests arrive, and those who do eat with one eye on the horizon. Even the palace cats, once plump and spoiled, now skulk nervously from room to room, as if expecting someone to put out their torches. A fringe detail overheard from a chatty eunuch with nothing to lose. Boabdil has begun having dreams of drowning in salt water, where the voices of his ancestors call to him from beneath the waves. He wakes gasping, unsure if it's prophecy or just indigestion from the lentil stew. Meanwhile, the Catholic monarchs grow bolder. Ferdinand and Isabella, already famous for their determined campaigns and absolute intolerance for compromise, have spent years slowly squeezing Granada from all sides. They've taken key fortresses like Malaga and Alhama, disrupted trade routes and sent letters to local Muslim leaders promising mercy if they turn on their sultan. And some do. It's not personal, it's strategic. They have families, lands, futures, and if that means helping Granada fall so they themselves might rise, well, that's just how history's made sometimes, by tired men in smoky rooms making the least awful decision on the pebble. In response, Boabdil tries diplomacy. He sends envoys northward, offering loyalty in exchange for autonomy. He offers gold, he offers silence, he even offers the city itself, so long as he can remain in power as a sort of puppet prince. Ferdinand considers it, then tightens the noose. Isabella, it is said, wants complete and total surrender. No half measures, no dual flags, no illusions of independence. Only one crown will remain in Iberia, and it will bear a cross. You accompany a messenger returning from the Christian camp, his robes dusted with fear and dried sweat. He says the Castilian army is growing daily, reinforced by knights from all corners of Christendom. Their siege weapons are terrifying. Massive bombards capable of reducing towers to rubble, and arquebuses that pierce armour with frightening ease. Granada's defenders still rely on older tools, bravery, stone walls and faith. They hold for now, but the math is grim, and Boabdil knows it. Still, he hesitates. He convenes councils, he listens to religious leaders. He walks through the palace gardens in long, silent loops, and sometimes you think he's just trying to remember what peace used to feel like. His mother continues to push for war. His wife urges negotiation. His nobles do what nobles always do, jockey for position, leak secrets, and commission flattering portraits just in case. And yet, despite everything, Granada remains breathtaking. At sunset, the city glows. The red clay of the Alhambra seems to catch fire as the Sierra Nevada looms behind it like a silent sentinel. The narrow streets below are filled with life, markets still bustle, oud players still strum melancholy songs, and children still chase each other through arches older than most kingdoms. It's as if the city itself refuses to mourn until it absolutely must. You reach the edge of the palace walls one evening and watch torches flicker in the distance. Ferdinand's army camped like a storm cloud just out of reach. You count the fires, too many. The soldiers sing hymns around them, preparing for siege, for glory, for a history that will forget most of their names but remember the flag they raised. You feel the wind shift. Time tightens. The king returns from another sleepless night with dark circles beneath his eyes and a prayer on his lips. The fate of Al-Andalus now rests not on armies or walls or treaties, but on the increasingly fragile decisions of one overwhelmed, uncertain man who has inherited a dying world and can't decide whether to rage, plead, or bow. You can't help but wonder what he sees when he looks in the mirror each morning. A sultan, a failure, a footnote, or simply the last candle in a room that once held 1,000. You find yourself wandering the dim corridors of the Alhambra. On a night so quiet it feels like the whole fortress is holding its breath. And for good reason, because within these intricately tiled walls, lit only by oil lamps and filtered moonlight, a different war is unfolding. One not fought with swords or cannons, but with secrets, whispered deals, and subtle betrayals wrapped in velvet and honey. You catch glimpses of figures moving too quickly through archways, their sandals barely whispering against the polished stone floors, and before long it becomes obvious that Granada isn't just under siege from the outside, it's rotting quietly from the inside. Sultan Boabdil, always hesitant and always surrounded by too many advisors with too many conflicting loyalties, is trying to balance a chessboard where half the pieces are bribed and the other half are bored. His courtiers and nobles smile at him in daylight, offer their loyalty with extravagant bows, and then slip out through secret side doors at dusk to meet with Christian envoys under the guise of trading discussions. One merchant you overhear admits to hiding letters inside ceramic jars of saffron, notes passed between the Sultan's own circle and the Castilian army, updating troop positions, food shortages, morale. It turns out treachery doesn't need a sword. It just needs plausible deniability and a deep pouch of silver. Historians still argue whether Boabdil knew the full extent of the rot in his court, or whether he was so overwhelmed by the daily flood of bad news that he chose to look away, hoping silence would somehow keep the walls from crumbling. But you know better. There's no silence thick enough to drown out betrayal. The city is becoming a maze of double agents. Some Muslim nobles, weary of infighting and terrified of total ruin, have begun writing secret oaths of fealty to Ferdinand and Isabella, hoping to be spared when the city finally falls. Others are playing both sides, promising one thing to the Sultan and another to the Christians, with the aim of simply surviving. You pass a gathering of palace guards playing dice and drinking mint water laced with something stronger, and you hear them joke about which of them will be the first to shave their beard and pretend to be Catholic once the gates fall. They laugh, but no one corrects them. Meanwhile, in the women's quarters, where veils are drawn but gossip runs wild, alliances are being formed over pomegranate juice and embroidered pillows. Aksa, the Sultan's mother, remains a fierce and watchful presence, though many whisper that her influence now wanes. Once the power behind her son's throne, now she spends her time quietly interrogating her own servants to root out spies and questioning the loyalty of her daughter-in-law. And she's right to be suspicious. Boabdil's wife, Maraima, though quiet and outwardly obedient, is said to have family ties in the Christian-held territories and has begun writing long letters that no one is allowed to read. Whether they're love letters, warnings, or surrender notes is anybody's guess. Even the palace eunuchs have started choosing sides. You follow one down a narrow staircase beneath the baths and discover a hidden chamber where coded messages are etched into the underside of wooden trays. Messages in Latin, Arabic, and a third hybrid language that only a few people in the palace can read. Some of these trays are delivered to the kitchens, others smuggled out of the city in baskets of spoiled fruit meant to be discarded beyond the walls. It's a whole shadow world operating beneath the grandeur of Granada's final days. And yet, despite the treachery, the city still clings to its routines. The call to prayer still echoes from the mosques. The markets still open at dawn with the cries of fig sellers and cloth merchants. But even these rituals are starting to fray. People speak more softly now. Eyes linger too long on unfamiliar faces. You see one young man arrested simply for asking how far the Christian camp has advanced. Nothing more than a question, but enough to earn a beating and 3 days chained in the old wine cellar. Trust has become so scarce it might as well be gold. Even the scholars, once above such things, have started accusing each other of heresy or cowardice. One imam is quietly exiled for suggesting that perhaps, if the Christians conquer the city, they could be reasoned with. Another is praised for proclaiming a fatwa declaring death before dishonour, though no one seems eager to act on it just yet. But the fear is there, and it's spreading. There's even talk of magical protections, a fringe idea, whispered by a mystic healer who swears the city can only fall if someone spills blood beneath the Lion Court's central fountain. So now, at night, guards make sure no one lingers there too long, especially not with a knife. Desperation, it seems, breeds not just betrayal, but superstition. You wander deeper into the palace and find yourself eavesdropping on a secret council meeting taking place behind a half-closed mashrabiyah screen. Boabdil is there, surrounded by his closest, if such a word still applies, nobles and scholars. He asks them, "If I surrender, will they spare the people?" Silence. One old vizier clears his throat and says, "They will promise to." Another laughs bitterly and replies, "And what does a promise mean when written in Latin?" The Sultan leans back, weary. You realize he isn't deciding whether to fight or not. He's deciding whether to delay surrender another day or another week, hoping for a miracle that will never come. Perhaps the most chilling sign of Granada's decay is in its music. Once, the palace rang with songs, poetry set to strings, ballads of glory, love, longing. Now the musicians still play, but they don't look at each other. They strum as if out of obligation, the notes slower, sadder. One flutist you watch quietly breaks his instrument in half after finishing a song. No one asks why. You also notice that the gardens are no longer tended. The fountains still run, yes, but the hedges are overgrown, and the flower beds show weeds. One gardener explains with a shrug, "Why prune what we cannot keep?" And perhaps he's right. Yet Boabdil continues to wear the trappings of royalty. He still holds court. He still rides out in ceremonial parades, waving to smaller and smaller crowds. His robes are immaculate, his turban jewelled. But his eyes dart constantly, and you can sense he's beginning to suspect that no one in his palace truly serves him anymore. At least not for free. A quirky tale floats among the servants that one of Boabdil's favourite advisors keeps 2 coin purses sewn into his robe, one for Christian gold, the other for Nasrid silver, and that depending on which door he exits through, he adjusts his speech to favour whichever sponsor paid him last. It's probably not true. Then again, in these final days, the line between rumour and reality is so thin you could slip a blade through it. And speaking of blades, another, darker subplot emerges. Some nobles, unwilling to see the city surrendered, are planning to assassinate Boabdil and replace him with a puppet who will fight to the death. The plot is half-baked and mostly idiotic, involving a forgery proclamation and a fire set in the stables as distraction. But it underscores just how fractured the court has become. You overhear this from a parrot, oddly enough, belonging to the concubine of a disgraced general, and trained to recite, "Kill the king, save the crown," in perfect Arabic. When asked about it, she simply laughs and says the bird is senile. No one believes her. And so each night the palace tightens, thickens with intrigue. Granada still shines from afar, its towers glinting gold in the twilight, but up close you can see the rust. The final days of Al-Andalus aren't marked by epic battles or heroic speeches, not yet. but by quiet betrayals whispered in rose-scented corridors, carried on the tips of jewelled fingers, hidden in the margins of books, and served on silver platters lined with lies. You step beyond the city walls now, your slippers crunching over dry scrub and loose pebbles as the landscape around Granada slowly transforms from familiar orchards and farms into an uneasy borderland crawling with tension and iron. And from your vantage just beyond the olive groves, you begin to see the siege take form. Not with a roar, not with a sudden thunder of war drums or dramatic cavalry charges, but with a slow, creeping inevitability, like cold air crawling under a door. The Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, are not here to shock and awe, they are here to smother. They arrive with an army not just of soldiers, but of scribes, priests, engineers, diplomats and cooks. You count the tents first, hundreds of them, white and orderly, like rows of teeth biting into the hills around Granada. The banners flutter lazily in the wind, crosses, lions and castles, reminders that the war is not only military but ideological, a campaign draped in divine righteousness and centuries of tension. These two monarchs are not reckless glory seekers, not theatrical crusaders shouting Latin into the wind. They are bureaucrats with an army, and they have come to finish a very old project, the full Christian reconquest of Iberia, a goal nearly 800 years in the making. Ferdinand, quiet-eyed and shrewd, is a master of logistics. He knows how many sacks of flour a soldier needs per week, how much salt can be transported by mule, and which bridge must be rebuilt to speed cannon deliveries. Isabella, the colder one, the more visionary, sees the campaign as a moral purification of Spain, a sacred duty wrapped in steel and scented with incense. You overhear her telling a bishop, "There can be no peace while the infidel pollutes these hills." That's not just rhetoric, it's a roadmap. Her orders are delivered with quiet certainty, and her generals obey as if her voice carried the weight of scripture. You walk among their soldiers in the early days of the siege and see it for yourself, the discipline, the grimness, the weariness that comes not from fear but from long preparation. These men have been campaigning for years, many of them hardened in earlier battles in Malaga and Ronda. They know the drill, dig in, cut supply lines, offer terms and wait. The idea is not to storm Granada in a blaze of glory, that would be costly and unpredictable, but to starve it, slowly, methodically, until the city surrenders from the inside out. And so begins the quiet siege. You notice first how roads are closed, trade routes vanish. Even the winding mountain paths once used by smugglers and messengers are patrolled. Granada becomes an island in its own land. Messengers are intercepted, letters rewritten, and bribes intercepted. The Christian camp sprawls day by day. New trenches here, a watchtower there, a wooden chapel with a golden cross erected on a hilltop, where its shadow falls long over the Nasrid capital. The psychological pressure is as relentless as the military blockade. Christian preachers roam the outskirts with bullhorn voices and verses from Revelation, shouting that the serpent shall be slain and that Christ shall reign where once the crescent dared rise. Of course, the soldiers aren't saints. You hear them curse, gamble, get drunk on watered wine. Some of them have fleas. One night you pass a card game between three hungry crossbowmen betting on which day the Sultan will weep in surrender. "I say Thursday," one mutters. "Kings always crack before the Sabbath." Not everyone is here for holy glory. Many came for land or loot or titles. A soldier named Matteo tells you he's just hoping to marry a Muslim widow rich enough to retire. Practical ambitions, it seems, are also part of divine conquest. Still, the longer you linger, the more this siege feels like a military bureaucrat's dream. Precise, managed, and mostly bloodless. You see engineers setting up wooden hoists to lift the cannons that will be used later, constructing platforms out of seasoned pine imported from Navarre. These are not the thundering bombards of romantic tales, but heavy, ugly brutes that belch fire and smash stone. You also notice how carefully provisions are tracked. Grain, beans, salted pork, every shipment logged, every sack weighed. Nothing is left to chance, and while the Christians build outward, they also dig inward, literally. They begin tunneling near the walls, hoping to weaken Granada's defences from below. You ask one miner how deep they've gone. He just grins and says, "Far enough to hear their prayers through the stone." You shiver, unsure if he's serious, but the psychological warfare doesn't stop there. At night, bonfires are lit around the hilltops, not for warmth, but as a visible ring of fire encircling the city. Granada glows in its own doom. Letters are shot over the walls by arrow or launched with small catapults. Letters offering mercy in exchange for surrender, and warning of worse things if Boabdil refuses. Some are addressed directly to nobles known to be wavering. Others are just Bible verses, dramatic and dripping with judgment. And you begin to see signs that it's working. Within Granada, rationing begins. Chickpeas stretch further than ever. The palace kitchens substitute dried figs for honey. You see servants carting out empty spice chests, their brass lids gleaming but hollow. Even the fountains in Alhambra are rumoured to have slowed, though that might be paranoia. But what you do know is this: fear is growing. The siege has teeth, even if it hasn't bitten yet. Back in the Christian camp, morale remains high. Priests hold daily mass. Drums beat at dawn. Isabella walks through the ranks with stern serenity, blessing soldiers and gently admonishing those who slack. Ferdinand reviews reports, drafts letters, sends gifts to the Pope reminding him of their holy mission. He knows history will remember this campaign not just as a war, but as a statement, Spain for Christianity. You overhear a scribe dictating to a page, "When Granada falls, it will be as if Eden has been reclaimed." Fringe story alert. One day during the siege, it's said that a shooting star blazed across the sky, and both camps interpreted it as a sign. Granada's astrologers said it meant deliverance. Isabella's chaplain claimed it was the sword of St. Michael. Later, both sides admitted privately they were just trying to calm their own people. You begin to understand the real genius of the siege, not in violence but in pressure. Constant, controlled, quiet pressure. The city's defenders, seeing no battles, no direct assaults, begin to fray mentally. The nobles grow restless, some flee, others switch sides. And Boabdil? He watches from his towers, unsure whether to admire the enemy's discipline or curse their patience. He knows time is not on his side. One night you see something strange, a pair of doves flying from the Christian camp toward the city. At first you think they're just birds, but then you spot the thin parchment tied to their legs. Messages. Someone inside is feeding information to the enemy. Later that night you hear the Sultan order 3 arrests. No names are given, no trials held, just a quiet removal. The siege isn't just outside the walls anymore, it's inside, tightening with every passing day. The Christians wait. Granada cracks. The quiet siege works not by breaking the body, but by breaking the will. You slip through a half-ajar cedarwood door carved with swirling Kufic script and step into a world untouched by the dust of soldiers' boots or the cold metal of siege engines. A sanctuary of ink and parchment where Granada's last Muslim scholars still gather in cloistered corners of the Alhambra and its satellite madrasas, chasing the light of reason even as darkness creeps ever closer. Here, under flickering lamplight and the scent of old paper mingled with rosewater, you find men and a few daring women who continue to copy texts with trembling hands, transcribing not just words but memories of a civilization that once thought itself immortal. You watch as an elderly scribe, beard dusted with ash from nearby cannon tests, gently places a stylus to vellum and begins writing out the verses of Ibn Rushd, Averroes to the Latin world. His ink thick with desperation, his strokes deliberate like someone preparing a eulogy. Around him, shelves sag beneath the weight of texts that span the known world. Greek philosophy translated into Arabic, Indian astronomy, Persian poetry, Berber law codes, Andalusi musical treatises, and even copies of Aristotle's metaphysics annotated with centuries of marginalia. There's something sacred about this quiet resistance, this belief that while borders may fall and empires crumble, the written word, when preserved carefully enough, might slip past the wreckage and whisper across generations. Historians still argue whether the libraries of late Nasrid Granada were truly as vast and comprehensive as legend claims, or whether nostalgia has inflated their memory like an overstuffed pouch. But in this moment you don't care, because what matters is that they're trying. They're still trying. You trail one scholar down a narrow hallway, lit only by a single pierced lantern that scatters golden dots across the stone like stars, and he shows you the hiding places. Scrolls wrapped in lambskin and sealed in clay pots, tucked into niches behind false panels. Entire treatises concealed inside hollowed-out benches in the mosque. Manuscripts written in faded ink between the lines of old legal documents. The original words intentionally blurred so the real text reveals itself only under angled light. One copy of a scientific manuscript on optics has been disguised as a book of prayer, while another, a medical manual by Al-Zarawi, has had its pages laced with cinnamon to confuse any sniffing dogs the inquisitors might later use. It's almost absurd how much faith that these scholars have in the future. One young calligrapher even jokes as he dots the diacritic on a verse about lunar eclipses, "Someone will read this 1,000 years from now and think we were clever." You hope he's right, yet there's no denying the fear humming beneath their determination. Every time the earth trembles from distant cannon fire, someone spills ink. When a servant knocks too loudly, heads snap around. They know the end is near, and still they write, they teach, they debate. You sit in on a late-night gathering in one of the few still active madrasas, where 4 scholars argue the proper relationship between faith and reason, using references from Plato, Al-Farabi, and even Maimonides. Yes, the Jewish thinker from Cordoba, who was once honoured in this very land before religious tolerance began gasping for breath. The debate gets heated, not angry, just passionate, the way only people can be when they know they are the last ones left to carry a torch. One scholar pounds the table and says, "If we abandon logic now, we are not defending Islam, we are burying it." Another retorts, "If we defend it only with reason, we become like those who deny revelation." There's no resolution, only nods. But that's enough. Debate itself is survival. A fringe belief circles among some of the more mystical scholars here, that preserving knowledge is a form of jihad, not one of sword or tongue, but of the pen, and that every copied word counts as a blow struck against ignorance. They speak of ilm as armour, and their faith in that idea is unshakable. Even the students, young men and women barely into their teens, copy geometry tables and star charts with a kind of devotion usually reserved for prayer. One girl, no older than 12, recites lines from Al-Khwarizmi's algebraic methods while grinding her own ink from burnt pomegranate skins, and when asked why she bothers, she shrugs and says, "Because someone must remember." Not everything is so noble, though. You also overhear jealous squabbles about who gets to copy what or which texts deserve priority. One minor scholar, who insists he once studied in Fez, hoards a stack of Persian poetry under his robe and refuses to share. "It's mine," he whispers. "I carried it here myself." Others are more generous, and one even hands you a slim codex wrapped in oilcloth, saying, "If you survive, pass it on." It contains verses on Andalusian agriculture. Nothing grand, but quietly essential. A record of irrigation techniques, fruit grafting, seasonal planting, as if knowledge about figs might someday help rebuild the world. Some texts, though, are disappearing. Not burned, not lost, but quietly neglected. Erotic poetry, for instance, is quietly excluded from copying efforts, deemed non-essential in a time of war. One old poet sighs and says, "So ends joy." Music theory texts are harder to preserve, too bulky, too many diagrams. You see one pile of songbooks quietly feeding the fire that boils ink. Even so, the spirit of music lingers. You hear students humming maqams as they sharpen quills like lullabies for a dying city. And then there are the religious texts, Qur'ans are still copied, of course, but now often in miniature form, tiny pages that can be hidden in amulets or stitched into clothing. A local artisan even shows you how he's woven entire surahs into the lining of prayer rugs using dyed thread, invisible unless you know where to look. One imam, soft-voiced and with hands stained from indigo ink, tells you his plan to bury a full Quran under the mosque's mihrab. They will find it, he says, when they dig us up, and they will know what we believed. Outside, the siege grows closer, the city tighter. But in here, in this cloistered corner of parchment and purpose, it still feels like the world might somehow survive. Not the buildings, perhaps, nor the borders, but the essence of something. Ideas, formulas, verses, names. You think of the ancient library of Alexandria and how it burned, and how so many still speak of it as a ghost. Maybe Granada will become another ghost library. Maybe these shaibs, hunched over the fragile pages by the light of dying lamps, are composing the last words of Al-Andalus. But you can't deny the beauty in it, the sheer defiant poetry of continuing to write, to teach, to believe that someone someday might find these words again and breathe life back into them. And if not, well, at least someone tried. Someone still cared enough to spell the future out in ink. You drift now through the arteries of the city where the siege's invisible fingers squeeze tightest, not in the palaces or mosques, but in the tangled, sun-dappled alleys of the common quarters where the smell of garlic stew hangs heavier each day, not because it's abundant, but because it's being stretched thinner with every passing sunrise. And this part of Granada, where the scholars rarely tread and where the soldiers rarely linger, pulses with a different kind of survival, gritty, hungry, and almost begrudging in its loyalty to a city it knows is slipping away. The bazaar is still open, technically, though half its stalls are shuttered with prayer beads hanging like funerary curtains, and those who do come to trade do so with a quietness that no one can quite remember ever being part of commerce here. You pass a fishmonger selling nothing but salted bones, a baker slicing stale loaves so thin they might float away, and a spice seller hawking saffron that's more marigold powder than the real thing, all while muttering under his breath about a cousin who fled to the Christian side 2 weeks ago and hasn't been heard from since. Children dart between carts, not laughing, not playing, just watching. One barefoot girl sits by a step chewing on a pomegranate rind, not because she doesn't know it's bitter, but because it's the only part left. You hear mutterings about shortages, yes, but more dangerously about the Sultan's silence, about what happens next, about whether surrender would really be worse than starvation. Historians still argue whether the common people of Granada ever truly stood behind Boabdil in his final days, or whether they simply endured him, seeing him less as a leader and more as a weather pattern, unpredictable, distant, and entirely beyond their control. What you do see, however, is that despite it all, they still perform their rituals. Water sellers still rattle their brass cups down the alleys, even though most of their jars are now filled from rooftop barrels catching rain. Storytellers still set up in the courtyard near the madrasa fountain, spinning tales of jinn and lost princes, even as their audiences dwindle to a few anxious mothers and restless boys pretending not to be afraid. One old man, blind in one eye, and wearing a kaftan stitched so many times it's more patch than fabric, recites tales of the Prophet's night journey in a voice so steady you'd think nothing was falling apart. You learn his name is Idris, and some say he fought the Castilians at Zahara back when Boabdil was still a boy, though others swear he never left the city walls and just made himself a legend for the price of a fig. But legends matter now. They glue the fragments of normalcy together. Without them, even the small routines, market days, courtyard games, late afternoon prayer, would unravel into panic. You follow a group of women up the hill toward a well, their water jars balanced on heads covered in frayed shawls, and you hear them arguing softly about whether they should send one of their sons to the Christian camp to ask for bread, just bread, nothing more, not even gold. One of them says, "If you go, you won't return, they'll keep you or baptize you or make you fight us." Another says, "At least he'd eat." That is the siege's sharpest edge. It carves mother from son, loyalty from need. You peer into the hammams, The public baths, once fragrant with oils and gossip, now cold and half-drained. No one has time to soak anymore. Cleanliness has been replaced by necessity. People scrub themselves with ash and old olive soap. There is no wood to burn, not when it's needed for cooking what little food remains. A teenage boy you meet, sharp-eyed, always barefoot, always running errands, tells you his job is to collect olive pits and sell them to bakers for fire fuel. He holds up a sack like it's treasure. He says his father used to be a falconer for the emir. Now he scavenges wax drippings from abandoned homes to make candles for the sick. Disease creeps through the poorer districts now, coughs that won't go away, fevers that no imam can pray away. Yet the apothecaries remain open. You visit one run by a widow named Hafsa, who no longer bothers to charge coin. "Bring me thread, herbs, scraps," she says, "and I'll give you something that might ease a night's pain." She gives out mint for nausea, rosemary for courage, and dried orange peel for stubborn children. "We are all stubborn," she mutters as once when no one's listening. You pass a mosque at sunset, the muezzin still calling the faithful, even though half the congregation now prays at home. Fear of gatherings, fear of being seen, fear of the future. The imam here, old, half-deaf, but still upright, delivers sermons that drift between theology and therapy. One Friday he says simply, "Granada has always outlasted her kings. Perhaps she will outlast this one too." It's neither hope nor resignation, just a statement. Meanwhile, in the Tanners' Quarter, where skins used to hang like flags of commerce, now the stench has overtaken the labour. No one wants used sandals, they want stew. You see one man, once a proud dyer known for his indigo work, now boiling down goatskin to extract fat. "We're eating the tools of our trade," he says with a cracked laugh, but he keeps boiling, keeps working, because that's what you do when you've got more ancestors than options. Fringe tales begin to surface, so people say the spirits of the city's founders now walk the streets in mourning, that the ancient jinn who once blessed Granada's aqueducts have withdrawn their magic, taking with them the city's good fortune. One butcher swears he saw a white horse vanish through a wall. A baker claims her bread rises only when she recites the call to prayer while kneading. These aren't superstitions, they're coping mechanisms shaped into folklore. You understand now why no one speaks too loudly in the streets. Not just because of the fear, but because silence has become a kind of shared agreement, like a contract between neighbours that says, "We will not name the doom approaching, because doing so might make it real." But even in silence, resistance simmers. You overhear a carpenter whisper that he's hiding 2 swords under the floorboards just in case. A group of teenage boys has formed a kind of underground watch, patrolling at night with sticks, convinced they'll spot Christian spies scaling the walls. It's laughable, but also not. Because when the official guards are too stretched, and when the palace doesn't answer, someone has to feel responsible, even if they are just children. Even if their weapons are carved from olive wood and courage. One woman you meet, elderly and nearly blind, says she's begun saving lentils in a jar under her bed, not to eat later, but to bury with her. "So my grave won't be hungry," she jokes. But no one laughs. You finally circle back to the main square where the fountains still trickle, though more sluggish now. Here, pigeons still gather, unaware of politics. Old men still sit and argue about which dynasty was best. "Abd al-Rahman III," one insists. "No, no, Yusuf Way," the other retorts. These are not history lessons, these are lullabies. And as night folds its arms around the city, lamps are lit not for celebration but defiance. The people of Granada, even in starvation and silence, still believe in lighting something. Because surrender may come from above, the palace may fall, the soldiers may flee, but down here in the cracks of the cobblestone there are still roots, still resistance, still people who chew on bitter rinds and dare to whisper, "We will live through this, even if Granada does not." You step into the Christian camp now, leaving behind the quiet desperation of Granada's winding alleys and entering a different kind of unease, one built not on hunger or fear, but on the grinding weight of expectation routine and the knowledge that victory is close enough to taste yet stubbornly out of reach. And here, among the rows of white canvas tents, timber palisades and muddy paths trodden flat by 1,000 boots, you find an army that looks more like a roving kingdom than a band of warriors, a living organism fed daily by wagons of bread, barrels of wine, crates of salted cod, and dispatches from churches and cathedrals across Europe. It is morning when you arrive and the camp is already humming, smoke rising from cook fires where gruel is stirred with wooden spoons by men whose hands once held lances, women fetching water, children chasing stray chickens, and priests setting up their travelling altars on foldable tables with the same seriousness as a coronation. Isabella's part of the camp, known as the Queen's Quarter, is spotless, orderly, a miracle of cleanliness in a world that otherwise smells like sweat and boiled cabbage. Her linen sheets are changed daily, her tent is perfumed with dried lavender and holy incense, and the cooks who prepare her meals work in silence, knowing one broken yoke might cost them a month's pay. The Queen herself walks among her people with a sternness that turns heads and silences whispers, her veils always white, her rosary polished, and her spine never seems to bend. Historians still debate how much military strategy she actually influenced. Some argue she was the mastermind behind the siege's slow suffocation. Others say she simply approved whatever Ferdinand planned. But everyone agrees on this. Isabella believed with a fire that turned tactics into something holy, and that fire radiated outward, even to the most exhausted page boy folding laundry in the mud. Ferdinand, meanwhile, is the spider at the centre of the web. He receives maps, messages, and rumours from 3 different secretaries at once, sitting at a carved writing desk that has somehow followed him from Valladolid to Malaga to here. And though he rarely raises his voice, no one mistakes his calm for softness. You observe his planning sessions, long hours of low-voiced discussions with generals who trace hill contours with twigs and place pebbles to represent cannons, and it becomes clear that while the siege may look static, it's anything but. There are diplomatic feelers sent north toward France, toward Rome, even toward certain mercantile families in Genoa and Venice, who've long hated the Muslim control of Andalusian ports. There are letters sent to sympathetic nobles within Granada's walls, delivered via messengers who pretend to be lost shepherds or singing beggars. And there are reports, dozens daily, about the state of morale, the shifting winds, the patterns of pigeons, anything that might hint at the city's final crack. But despite all this, the camp is not invincible. Supplies run low, rains turn the dirt into sucking mud that swallows carts. Disease creeps from tent to tent, and the doctors, armed with rosemary vinegar and wishful thinking, are as much chaplains as physicians. You pass a makeshift infirmary where a boy with fever mumbles old ballads from Aragon in his sleep. Next to him, a man with a gangrenous leg grips a wooden cross and refuses to die until Granada falls or God takes me himself. The camp dogs roam freely, some half-wild, some pampered mascots for noblemen. One large mastiff is rumoured to belong to Ferdinand himself and has been trained to bark only at Moors. No one has tested this, yet. You're shown around by a mercenary named Ruiz, who has fought under 3 banners and swears he once drank with pirates in Ceuta. "This is the strangest war I've ever seen," he says, gesturing toward the silent walls of Granada in the distance. "They won't come out. We won't go in. It's like a marriage with no love." He shows you the camp forge, where smiths repair dented helmets and sharpen pikes with the same rhythm as prayer beads ticking toward salvation. The smell of oil and sweat lingers. You learn that some of these smiths are former Muslim converts, men who fled the city months ago, who now hammer weapons they once feared. There is an unease among them. You see it in the way their eyes flick toward the horizon when the wind carries the distant sound of the adhan from Granada's mosques. There's even a fringe story going around that one of the blacksmiths, an old man with burn scars and no teeth, secretly recites Arabic verses while he works, not out of loyalty but out of muscle memory. When asked, he says nothing, just keeps hammering. Even in this organised camp, faith is a battlefield. Each morning begins with Mass, bells chimed by tired altar boys and sermons delivered under rain or sun, always ending with a prayer for Granada's fall and a reminder that this war is God's will. But privately, the soldiers are less certain. You hear them muttering at night, wondering if the city's resistance is a sign of divine displeasure. Some whisper that Granada has a saint of its own, a secret protector cloaked in shadows. Others speak of strange dreams of ghostly riders seen galloping along the ridgelines just before dawn. Whether born of wine or weather, the rumours persist. And yet, in the daylight, the machine of war grinds on. Supplies arrive weekly. Scouts are dispatched daily. The artillery captain, a rotund man who swears like a poet and wears a feathered hat far too large for his rank, checks his cannon angles obsessively, sketching calculations on a slab of slate and muttering things like, "A finger's tilt means a monastery's difference." He shows you a new type of shot, metal balls packed with lead nails, meant not for walls, but for people. Soon, he says, they'll have no choice but to come out. And then there are the engineers, the unsung builders who have erected small wooden towns within the camp. They craft ladders taller than towers, design wheeled shelters called mantlets, and even attempt a siege tunnel before abandoning it due to poor soil. They argue constantly their plans more ambitious than physics allows, but their ambition is part of the army's spirit. If we cannot break the walls, one says, then we will build over them. Amid all this, music occasionally breaks the monotony. Drummers rehearse martial rhythms. A fiddler plays for the Queen. One troubadour composes a ballad called The Moorish Rose, with thorns of stone, which becomes popular despite being frankly terrible. But people sing it anyway. They need stories, even bad ones. And through it all, Isabella watches. She does not speak often, but when she does, people listen. One evening you hear her address a group of tired knights who've been riding patrol in the hills. "You are not just soldiers," she says. "You are witnesses. History is watching through your eyes." It's corny. It works. They ride out again the next day with their backs straighter. The camp, for all its faults and sickness and political manoeuvrings, is a machine that believes in its own purpose. And belief, when fed with enough discipline and bread and steel, becomes destiny. But belief doesn't keep everyone loyal. You learn of a scribe who disappeared last week, taking 2 maps and a sealed letter with him. Rumour says he went to the moors. Others say he simply fled the pressure. Either way, his tent now sits empty. The feather quill he left behind still flutters in the breeze, like a white flag someone forgot to raise. War, even a siege like this, isn't always about who wins, it's about who lasts. And the Christians, for now, are lasting. You find yourself now back within the high walls of the Alhambra, where the red fortress watches over the shrinking city like a mother who cannot feed her children, and as you walk its labyrinth of tiled corridors and carved cedar chambers, you begin to see that the siege pressing in from outside is only half the story. The real collapse, the one no historian can fully capture in maps or chronicles, is the slow and excruciating disintegration of trust. And it's happening right now inside these very walls, behind silk curtains, under domes inscribed with Quranic verses, where Sultan Muhammad XII, Boabdil, as he is called by history, but rarely to his face, is trapped not by Christian swords, but by the 1,000 small betrayals of those who are supposed to be his own. And the tragedy, of course, is that even he knows it. You observe him in his private chamber, seated on a low divan, the mosaic behind him chipped where someone once threw a dagger in an argument long forgotten, and he looks less like a ruler than a man held hostage by titles he never wanted. His eyes are shadowed not from sleeplessness, but from watching every move of his uncles, cousins, viziers, guards, even his mother, the sharp-tongued Aisha, who has already betrayed him once and might do so again before the last call to prayer echoes across the hills. You see her watching him now from across the chamber, face hidden behind a black veil, fingers wrapped in gold rings, whispering, just loud enough for the gathered nobles to hear, "A lion raised among doves is still a dove," and the insult lands as cleanly as any arrow. Historians still argue whether Boabdil was a tragic idealist, a coward thrust into a role he didn't choose, or a calculating survivor whose name only feels weak because his enemies wrote the ending. But here, inside his fortress, there is no need for scholarly debate. He's a man undone by hesitation. One day he calls for peace, the next he calls for reinforcements. The day after that he speaks of secret pacts. No one trusts him. Some pretend to, others don't bother. You trail one of his cousins, Yusuf, as he slips through a servant's passage late at night, emerging in a hidden courtyard where he meets with a man in a grey turban, the same man you saw earlier that week among the Christian camps out of Enders. Coins are exchanged. Words, too. You catch only a few. When the gate opens, Queen's promise, safe passage. The implication is enough. Granada is bleeding from within. The palace guards, once symbols of royal power, now function more as spies than protectors, watching the viziers who are watching the imams who are watching the palace kitchens where poisons may, or may not, be mixed into the sultan's meals. You see servants tested daily, made to taste the lamb stew, sip the rosewater, even chew the pomegranate seeds Boabdil prefers. Trust is dead, and yet, despite it all, the rituals continue. Council meetings are held each Friday, where dignitaries from what little remains of the Nasrid court argue over how many days until flour runs out, whether it's better to burn the archives or bury them, and what to do about the increasingly vocal faction calling for unconditional surrender. One vizier, old and stooped but still defiant, pounds the floor with his cane and declares, "Better to fall like lions than to kneel like merchants," and is promptly told to sit down by a younger noble whose family secretly sent word to Ferdinand last week. You can feel the tension coil tighter each time a door closes. The walls of the Alhambra were built to withstand siege, but not this kind. Boabdil's few remaining allies try to rally him. One, his old tutor, urges him to ride out and strike the Christians directly. "A final charge, my liege, for your name, if not your throne." But Boabdil only nods vaguely and stares out the Mashrabiyah screen, watching the enemy campfires like a man watching snowfall, slow and steady and undeniable. His mother corners him later and says, "If you won't act, then abdicate." He doesn't answer. She storms out. You visit the palace bathhouse, now drained and silent, where once Boabdil hosted poets and guests in marble-floored splendour. Now it echoes with ghost footsteps. A group of guards train there with dulled swords, practicing motions that they may never use. The sounds of steel clashing ring out like a funeral bell. One of the guards tells you in a whisper that morale is so low, they've taken to forging escape plans rather than defence strategies. "If he gives the order," the guard says, "I won't hear it. I'll already be gone." Even within Boabdil's own family there are cracks. His half-brother, still bitter over past slights, now stirs dissent openly. Rumours swirl that he's ready to proclaim himself emir the moment the Christians breach the walls, if he isn't already writing secret letters to them. A document intercepted last week, carried by a frightened pigeon shot from the sky, was addressed not to Boabdil, but to the future Lord of Granada. No one knows who sent it. Everyone has guesses. Fringe stories swirl through the palace, superstitions and shadow tales that gain traction in the vacuum of hope. Some claim the Alhambra's fountains run slower because the spirits that once blessed them have turned their backs. Others say a hidden vault beneath the Court of the Lions contains a door that opens only when the true ruler speaks his name without fear. One young page swears he saw the ghost of Yusuf the Upgars pacing the hall of the ambassadors, muttering curses about how far his bloodline has fallen. You watch this all unfold and realise the Alhambra is still beautiful, but it is rotting from within. And in the midst of it all, Boabdil remains maddeningly passive. He writes letters to the Pope begging for time. He pens verses about lost stars. He rearranges his falcon's perch. A poet, not a general. A philosopher, perhaps, but one asked to lead a war. Still, there are moments, brief flashes, when he seems to wake from this stupor. One morning he dons armour, mounts his horse and rides to the city gate with 40 guards. The city cheers, children shout, for a moment everyone believes, but he does not leave the gate. He merely surveys the enemy from afar and returns. The armor is placed back on its rack. The people return to their hunger. Even his brief courage now feels like a performance. One vizier tells you quietly, he wants to be remembered as noble, not effective. And so, inside these walls, where once the sultans of Granada composed letters to Mamluk Egypt and the Ottoman court, where ambassadors once bowed and horses were gifted with silk saddles and spices, there is now only doubt, fear, and a ruler who can't seem to choose between martyrdom and memory. He walks the halls at night, accompanied only by a eunuch who lights his path with a brass lantern. The palace is too large for one man's uncertainty, and all the while the Christians wait. You're wandering now not through palaces or camps, but the spaces in between, the humble streets where tiles have cracked under 100 years of footsteps, where the breeze carries the scent of mint tea boiled too long and bread stretched too thin, where the true soul of Granada hides, not in the declarations of sultans or the strategy of monarchs, but in the whispered prayers and daily rituals of its ordinary people who wake each morning unsure whether they'll eat or pray first, and often do both with the same empty stomach. You hear the muezzin's call rise in the distance, still regular, still melodic, but quieter now, as though even the voice lifted heavenward is being careful not to offend, and the mosques that once thrummed with Friday crowds now host fewer worshippers, not out of disloyalty but out of fatigue. People pray at home, in cellars, in alleyway corners, sometimes just with eyes closed and lips barely moving. Faith has not died. It's simply grown smaller, more private, curled inward like a cat against the cold. You visit one such home, a modest dwelling of 3 rooms where 4 generations now sleep beneath the same ceiling, because half the neighborhood has already fled or disappeared, and the great-grandmother of the house, Zara, sits at a wooden loom, weaving prayer rugs not to sell but to bury. She believes firmly that each thread knotted in God's name creates a shield around her family's grave before it's even dug. She murmurs Quranic verses under her breath as she works, pausing only to sip bitter tea from a chipped cup and wipe her hands on a cloth once embroidered with her wedding date. Her daughter, Layla, tends a rooftop garden with only 3 herbs left alive, thyme, mint and rue, and says she still makes poultices for the sick even though she no longer expects them to recover. Her son Kareem, once a scholar at the Madrasa Yusufiyya, now teaches neighborhood children in the basement using a single tattered copy of the Quran and a wax tablet cracked in 2. We do not stop learning, he tells you, because knowledge is the only part of us they cannot burn. Historians still debate whether Granada's common people maintained this level of quiet resilience throughout the entire siege, or whether their faith wavered in the final weeks. But here in this home, faith is not wavering. It is simply reshaped, like a candle melting into a new form when the heat becomes too much. And yet not all are so steadfast. You pass others who have turned to mystics and fringe preachers, men who claim visions and women who speak in tongues, warning that angels walk the rooftops in sorrow and that the final trumpet has already sounded, but only the truly faithful can hear it. One preacher, barefoot and dressed in white linen, calls out from the plaza that the stars have shifted position and that this is the sign of the end. The moon has turned its face from us, he cries, and only blood can make it look again. People stop to listen. Some weep, some laugh. A few throw stones, but no one walks away unmoved. In another district, a Sufi brotherhood meets in secret beneath the Hammam ruins, chanting dhikr softly under their breath in circles lit by oil lamps wedged into broken alcoves. Their leader, a tall, gaunt man who lost his family in the last famine, and now says, "When the city falls, we shall rise inward." He believes salvation is within, not beyond, and his followers hum and sway like reeds in wind, unmoved by cannon fire in the distance. Even children now speak in prophetic fragments. One boy you meet, no older than 9, tells you that his dreams are full of red birds flying away from the city. They don't look back, he says, because there's nothing left to look at. You ask where his parents are. He shrugs and points toward the mosque. You never find them. Among women too, a new kind of strength has emerged. Practical, sharp-edged, and tired of waiting. Midwives double as herbalists, widows run communal kitchens, and daughters who once embroidered wedding dresses now stitch burial shrouds. One group of women has formed a rotating watch that patrols the street at night, not to keep out invaders, but to comfort any children who cry out in their sleep. We've become grandmothers to the whole quarter, one says, adjusting her headscarf with a sigh that carries centuries. In the quieter homes, people prepare for surrender in subtle ways. Gold is sewn into hems, names are hidden under paint, Arabic books are buried in walls or disguised as cooking manuals. A man who once sold oranges now offers lessons in Latin to anyone willing to pay with food. They will make us read their prayers, he says, so we might as well learn the words now. Resistance and resignation blend so closely it becomes impossible to tell which is which. You see a father teaching his daughter both the Shahada and the Ave Maria, just in case. She recites them equally, not understanding the difference, only knowing both make her father cry. Yet even as some prepare to convert, others dream of martyrdom. A fringe group, mostly young men, has taken to painting verses of victory across the Aliyah walls using ashes and goat's blood. Their leader is a former calligrapher who once decorated palace walls but now writes only on stone. If the stones remember, he says, then the city is not lost. You follow one of his followers to an old granary-turned-prayer room, where they gather at night and plan not war but legacy. We cannot defeat them, he says, but we can curse them in verse. They write poems in secret, praising the prophet and mocking the Catholic monarchs. One line reads, "Let them take the walls, they cannot take the wind." You watch a girl no older than 16 compose a couplet about the Alhambra's fountains weeping for their masters. She leaves the paper under a brick and walks away. No one knows who will find it. Maybe no one ever will. But that's not the point. In a ruined city, art becomes rebellion. Even in the graveyards, a quiet defiance stirs. Families gather to clean stones, to recite surahs, to whisper old names in the soil. One old man, barely able to walk, insists on being buried facing not just Mecca, but toward the river Darrow. "So I can hear the city when I sleep," he says. His sons nod solemnly and begin digging a second time to shift the grave by 2 handspans. These are the kinds of choices people make now, spiritual, symbolic, irrational to outsiders, but completely necessary to those whose whole identity is bound to this land. And as night falls, you feel it settle over the rooftops like a quilt stitched with memories. The city does not sleep easily. Too many echoes, too many goodbyes left unsaid. But it does not cry either. That, perhaps, is the most haunting part. There is no wailing, no open despair, just the slow, steady closing of a door that everyone sees, but no one can stop. The people of Granada are not waiting for rescue anymore. They are waiting to be remembered. You follow now the narrow current of diplomacy that snakes its way out of the tightening noose around Granada. Because while soldiers guard the gates and civilians hide their books, there are still men, scribes, emissaries, half-starved scholars with soft hands and sharper tongues, who believe words might still undo what swords have fastened shut, and these men work in candle-lit rooms behind thick curtains, scribbling appeals in Arabic and sometimes even Latin, addressed to kings, sultans, popes, and merchants, scattering these final desperate seeds across a dry and sceptical Europe. Boabdil has not given up entirely on the idea of help, even if his face says otherwise. One of his last hopes lies in the Mamluks of Egypt who, though entangled in their own succession dramas, are still theoretically bound by religious solidarity. So you watch as a young diplomat, barely more than a boy, is sent out with a scroll tied in silk and a caravan of dates and silks meant to remind Cairo that Granada once stood as their western mirror. He never returns. Some say he was captured, others say he defected. One rumour claims he simply disappeared into the mountains with a Christian girl and a bag of gold. deciding that love and survival mattered more than dying for a city already half dead. Then there's the Ottoman Empire, ascendant and awe-inspiring, sitting far to the east like a brooding eagle on a golden perch. They had once promised support in vague, flowery language. "You are not alone under the sun of Islam," a previous sultan had declared, but now in these final hours, their ships do not appear. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans were ever seriously planning an intervention, or whether it was all diplomatic courtesy stretched too thin by distance and more pressing wars. You see this disappointment written on the faces of Granada's few remaining diplomats, men who wear turbans too large for their trembling heads and carry the weight of too many unanswered letters. One leans against a crumbling archway, muttering, "We are the last echo in a mosque already silent." And then, strangely, there is Morocco, just across the strait, tantalizingly close, ruled by leaders who once shared bloodlines with Granada's kings. Envoys are sent again and again, promising trade privileges, eternal alliance, even marriages if needed. And for a time there is hope. A Moroccan prince sends word that he is assembling ships. A merchant arrives claiming he saw 100 sails in port. For 3 weeks the city holds its breath, but the sails never crest the horizon. The prince, it turns out, had enemies of his own. The fleet was either never launched or redirected for internal battles, and Granada is left staring southward at a sea that reflects only clouds. Among the Islamic scholars and imams still holding prayer councils in the city, this is seen as both political failure and divine judgment. One prominent imam begins delivering Friday sermons entirely in metaphor. The well has water, he says, but the rope is frayed and the bucket is cracked. No one needs a glossary. His listeners nod gravely. Meanwhile, a different sort of diplomacy is blooming in the shadows, quiet, personal and desperate. You follow a merchant named Tariq who claims to have a cousin inside Queen Isabella's court. He writes a letter in Castilian, offering to arrange a surrender that will preserve his family's bakery and allow his sons to convert quietly. "I will ring their bells," he says, "if they let my grandchild eat." He never hears back, but others are trying too. There are whispers of city elders approaching Christian lines under the cover of night, carrying bread and honey as peace offerings. One is captured and returns with a bruise across his jaw and a message carved into his palm with a hot needle. Decide quickly. It's unclear if this was a formal reply or just the cruelty of a bored soldier. You meet an old Jewish bookseller named Reuben, who has taken it upon himself to rewrite old Andalusi treaties, replacing the names and seals, trying to forge a paper trail of protection for himself and his neighbours. "The Christians like documents," he tells you. "Maybe they'll like mine." His hands shake as he stamps them with a wax seal shaped like a dove. You don't tell him that the Inquisition has already reached Córdoba. Some try to flee. You hear of boats smuggled up the Genil River, hidden in reeds and guided by Berber fishermen who know the bends better than most maps. Passage costs everything: gold, daughters, heirlooms. One family is caught mid-escape and paraded through the city in chains as a warning. Boabdil weeps when he sees the child's face. But the order to punish was his. He cannot even recognize his own contradictions now. In the palace, the scribes continue to copy letters. One is addressed to the Pope, begging for Christian mercy on grounds of shared Adamic blood. Another, astonishingly, is addressed to a Genoese merchant house, offering to sell the Alhambra in exchange for passage to North Africa. "Let the Christians keep the land," it reads. "Give us only a ship and a quiet dock." The offer is never acknowledged, but the draft remains, hidden in a cracked chest behind a tapestry of lilies. You discover it one evening, and for a moment you understand the level of despair hiding behind every polished speech and brave sermon. In the madrasa, a few remaining scholars gather to debate whether capitulation is lawful under Sharia if it preserves life. They cite old fatwas from the Maghreb, from Sicily, even from India. The debate grows heated. One scholar storms out, declaring, "A lion does not ask if the forest permits his roar." He dies of fever 2 nights later. The others whisper prayers over his body and continue the discussion. Even children are drawn into this web. In one courtyard, a boy draws pictures in the dirt of boats flying white flags. "Maybe if we say sorry," he says, "they'll bring us bread." His sister corrects him. "Only if we bring gold." Their mother scolds them for speaking so freely. You begin to notice that the people of Granada are no longer waiting for help. They are trying to become their own diplomats. One widow offers to convert publicly in exchange for protection over her husband's tomb. A leather worker offers to tan hides for Christian officers. A baker swears he will feed any army that enters. None of them know if the promises will matter, but making them feels better than silence. A strange rumour begins to spread of a European nobleman sympathetic to the Moors, one who has written to Isabella urging mercy, citing ancient Roman virtues and Christian compassion. Some claim he's real. Others think he's fiction invented to help people sleep. But the story is repeated so often, it becomes almost sacred. He will come, they say. He will speak for us. He never arrives. Finally, you return to Boabdil's private chamber, where he holds a sealed scroll in his lap. It is his last letter, addressed not to a king or sultan, but to God. He will not read it aloud, but you see his lips move. Let this end be one worth remembering. He signs the scroll, folds it into a cloth pouch, and tucks it into a crack in the wall. No one else knows it's there, except you. Diplomacy, like prayer, has become a ritual of delay. The messengers may ride, the letters may reach, but deep inside, even the senders know no one is coming. You find yourself in a strange in-between now, a kind of waiting room suspended between the last breath and the last blow, because both inside and outside Granada's walls, no one wants to be the one to say it's over, and yet everyone acts like it already is. And what begins here is less a battle and more a slow, theatrical unravelling of morale through symbols, noise, gestures, and the subtle sharpening of psychological blades as the Christian commanders shift their siege strategy from brute force to something softer, more insidious. Daily demonstrations of dominance designed not to breach the walls but to break the spirit. And from your vantage point atop the Alhambra's watchtower, you can see it clearly, the deliberate pageantry of Christian processions circling just outside range, their bright banners flapping arrogantly in the wind. Choirs singing Te Deum as if Granada were already theirs. And worst of all, the growing rhythm of church bells that begin ringing from newly raised chapels along the siege perimeter, slow and deep, tolling with the smug assurance of inevitable triumph, while within the city, the sound cuts like a blade into quiet alleys where people pause, close their windows and try to pretend they didn't hear it. Children flinch when the bells ring, dogs whimper. A butcher down near the river throws his cleaver at the wall and curses, "Even God has turned his face." Inside the Christian camp, these psychological tactics are carefully orchestrated. The priests walk through rows of tents sprinkling holy water on weapons, offering communion to soldiers before announcing, "Soon you will purify this land," and though some of the men roll their eyes, they eat the bread and nod all the same. You trail a friar who is compiling a victory sermon before the city has even fallen. "Preparation," he says. "Faith must be spoken before it is seen." You pass a noblewoman stitching a tapestry of the Alhambra into her travel cloth, already labelling it reclaimed. There's even a rumour, perhaps true, that Queen Isabella has commissioned a mass of thanksgiving to be performed the morning after the gates open, though no one has yet confirmed if she knows exactly when that will be. But symbols matter now more than swords. Every morning, Christian soldiers ride closer to the walls than the day before, not to attack, but to perform drills, polish armour in view of the sentries, let their horses prance arrogantly along the dry grass just out of arrow range. One officer even starts playing a lute from horseback, strumming old Aragonese love songs in earshot of the Muslim archers, waving cheekily whenever they raise a bow. "Just practicing," he shouts, grinning. The effect is cumulative. Inside Granada, these stunts twist into humiliation. At first, the city ignores them. Then it scoffs. Then it grows quiet. The jokes stop. In one household, a man who used to compose comic verses now spends his days scratching tally marks into his courtyard wall, not to count rations, but days until surrender. They are telling us what happens next, he mutters, and we're nodding. Even Boabdil begins to show signs of erosion. You observe him in the Court of Myrtles, standing still as a statue, while a single drop of water falls rhythmically from the fountain spout, and he says, "They will not even need to knock." His advisors grow restless. One urges him to display strength, to parade through the city in full regalia. Even lies have power if spoken boldly, the man argues. Boabdil agrees. A procession is arranged, musicians are called, flags are unfurled. But as the Sultan steps out in his ceremonial robe, a gust of wind knocks over the banner beside him. It lands in a puddle. Someone laughs. The whole thing dissolves before it even begins. In a desperate counter-move, Granada tries its own propaganda. Messages are painted on walls. The crescent never bows. Fires are lit on rooftops at night to signal resilience. One mosque hosts a massive prayer vigil where the imam declares, "Better to die on our feet than live on borrowed knees." The congregation roars, but the next day one of the fire towers collapses, the paint washes away in rain, and the imam is found missing. Rumour says he was taken by the faction that now favours surrender, for one investigates too closely. And then comes the strangest tactic yet: sound. The Christians start playing music at night, not war drums or marches, but gentle songs, harps, lutes, even choirs humming lullabies. From the ramparts, Granada listens in silence to melodies drifting in the wind. Some say it's beautiful, others say it's a form of torture. One woman covers her children's ears and whispers, "This is how empires die, by being serenaded into silence." You follow a teenage boy who sneaks to the edge of the wall nightly to listen. "It makes me feel like I'm already gone," he tells you, "like I'm floating outside the city watching myself disappear." Even the pigeons seem affected. Several flocks fly directly toward the Christian camp and never return. Superstitious locals believe they've been enchanted, turned into spies. One elder says, "If even the birds defect, what hope have we?" Across the river, you witness the construction of a giant wooden cross, carried day by day toward the city edge, erected at last upon a hill where it catches the sun like a sword turned vertical. No cannon, no speech, just wood and height. The statement is clear. Granada watches. No one speaks. Within the city, reactions vary. Some people grow harder, more stubborn. A group of young men paints the Alhambra's front gates with ochre and soot, adding new calligraphy each night, verses of divine justice and celestial fire. Others break. One merchant begins offering Christian trinkets for sale, crosses carved from pomegranate wood, mock rosaries made from date pits. For the transition, he says, no harm in being ready. He's later beaten in the plaza by his neighbours, but the bruises don't heal the mood. You pass a mother teaching her child how to say "forgive me" in Castilian. Not because we are weak, she says, but because we must survive. And amidst all this, the messages from the Christians begin to arrive, not through envoys, but dropped by arrows and pigeons, leaflets written in perfect Arabic promising safety, leniency, even property rights if surrender is swift. "Do not die for the pride of one man," one reads. "Your future waits outside these walls." Boabdil orders them burned. His advisors secretly read them anyway. One is found folded in a soldier's boot, another hidden in a bread oven. The leaflets multiply. One girl starts using them as drawing paper. Her father slaps her for disrespecting fate. Even the Christians begin to tire of the charade. One day, an Andalusian noble from inside the city rides alone to the Christian camp, unarmed, bearing bread. He kneels before Ferdinand and offers the loaf. "It's dry," he says, "but we offer it before it moulds." The gesture is symbolic. The king says nothing. He simply takes the bread and breaks it in half. The man rides back. The walls hold, but only just. In the final twist of this war of silence, one of the city's oldest fountains dries up. No blockage, no known reason, just emptiness. It had flowed since the days of Yusuf Fufus. A group of women gathers to mourn it like a death. The water has gone, one says, because it knows what comes next. And you, walking through the alleys and up the towers, listening to bells on one side and silence on the other, begin to realize what few dare to say aloud. Granada has not fallen yet, but it has already stopped standing. You are now moving through the last rhythm of ordinary life before it becomes history, and there's something haunting in how normal everything tries to remain while clearly nothing is normal at all, as if the very streets of Granada are putting on a last theatre performance, trying to convince themselves that if the curtains are never drawn, the show won't end. So you see the vendors still setting up their stalls before dawn, laying out dried figs and old almonds in neat rows, even though no one has any coins left. The water seller still dragging his creaky cart down the slope near the great mosque, though the springs are dry, and the cobbler near the gate still polishing shoes so no one buys just so he doesn't have to meet anyone's eyes. And the women, you see them hanging laundry between cracked arches, stitching fraying tunics by lantern light, grinding slices into paste as though guests might still arrive for dinner. But there's a hollowness now, a silence between sounds, like a breath being held for too long. This is the city's waiting room. Even the wind has changed, softer, drier, less full of the scent of orchards and more like dust blown in from the plains of fate. In one square, children play a slow version of tag that never seems to end, circling the same pillar over and over. They are not laughing anymore, just moving. An old man leans on a cane beside them and mutters, "Even games forget how to finish." You enter a dye house where the vats are dry, but the walls are still streaked with colours of cloth long gone. The owner, once famed for his pomegranate reds and saffron yellows, now boils cabbage to make a pale wash of purple. "In case we have to show our colours," he says, but he doesn't explain what that means. You step into a bakery where only 2 loaves remain and the baker keeps rearranging them on the shelf to make it look full. He whistles tunelessly and adds, "Some say the Christians don't eat bread like we do." He doesn't clarify whether that's a fear or a hope. You pass a courtyard where a group of scholars is debating whether they should bury the remaining books from the madrasa. One says, "If they find them, they'll burn them." Another says, "If we bury them, no one will ever find them again." A third just sits, hands on knees, repeating an old proverb. Words written and never read become ghosts. No decision is made. The books remain where they are, half covered with a tarp weighed down by bricks and old wine jugs. Historians still argue whether these texts were eventually preserved or lost entirely. Some fragments have reappeared in Italian libraries, others may yet be hidden in Granada's walls. But what's clear now is that nobody knows what version of themselves to protect anymore. The believer, the neighbour, the poet, the merchant, the ghost. One night you follow a group of women walking silently into the hills with clay jugs balanced on their heads. They move with practiced grace, not speaking, not slowing, and when you reach the top you see them pour water from the jugs into a stone cistern, each of them mouthing the same phrase silently, "For those who come after." Then they walk back. No one mentions it the next day. This ritual isn't in any history book. You hear from a boy who says his father sleeps in the bakery now, so he can dream where the yeast is. You don't know what that means, but you nod anyway. People say strange things when the world is ending. You meet a barber who still sharpens his razors every morning. When asked why, he replies, "'Cause if they demand our heads, I want to be the one who prepares." A silence follows. No one jokes about it. In the outskirts of the Albertine, where the rooftops overlook the Alhambra, like cousins watching a sick relative, the houses are still painted white, the iron balconies hung with vines, but the laughter has drained from the streets. Here, people have started whispering not about if, but about how. One man insists the surrender will be negotiated with grace. Another says there will be fire. A woman says they'll all be herded into churches and never come out. A child replies, "What's a church?" and the adults change the subject. Meanwhile, Boabdil remains inside the Alhambra. walking its tiled corridors like a ghost rehearsing his lines, meeting quietly with advisors who no longer bring new strategies but only daily damage reports. How many bricks fell from the old madrasa's minaret? How many loaves remain in the storehouse? How many soldiers still report for duty without prompting? One young officer tells the Sultan that the outer wall near Bab al-Ramla could be breached with a single day's work. Boabdil nods slowly and replies, "Then we must make sure no one does that work." He doesn't elaborate. Even inaction has become strategy. Now. At night, you hear conversations from behind closed windows. Someone says, "Should we hide the Quran or pretend we never owned one?" Another answers, "Both." A third asks, "Do you think they'll let us keep our names?" No one replies. The idea of forgetting your name becomes its own kind of terror. In one home, a woman has begun sewing new robes for her children, with no religious markings, no Arabic calligraphy, just plain wool, grey and soft. "They will ask questions," she says. "I want my children to look like no one." Her husband watches silently. He hasn't spoken since the mosque fire 2 weeks ago. You find an old man teaching 3 children how to recite poetry without writing it down. "They will take the paper," he says, "but not your tongue." The children repeat verses about oranges and lost gardens and stars that sleep in wells. You write one down, you feel guilty for doing so. Somewhere in the city, a painter is working gearishly, trying to finish one last mural on the back wall of his home. It shows the River Darrow flowing through an open gate, carrying palm leaves and stars. He says he'll cover it in plaster once it's done. "I want it to exist just once," he says, "then vanish." You don't ask why. He offers you a cup of warm milk before returning to his brushes. And above all this, the Alhambra still glows red at sunset, till towers like a dream too proud to end. And as you walk its halls one last time, you begin to feel what everyone here already knows, that the city is living through its own funeral, quietly, proudly, without flowers or eulogies, just rituals of daily defiance and whispered goodbyes. It isn't dead yet, but it is memorizing the way death will taste. Now you're inside the walls, not just of Grenadier, but of Boabdil himself, whose footsteps echo across empty palace floors where once his ancestors held lavish courts and scholars argued theology beneath the vines. And yet now all that remains is a ruler increasingly alone in every sense of the word, isolated by palace etiquette, haunted by ancestral shadows, and suspended between 2 impossible roles. The last emir of Al-Andalus, or the first refugee of a fallen dream. You follow him through the Court of Lions, where he pauses often, not to admire the carvings, but to touch them gently as though reminding himself that this place once responded to him. A servant brings news that another section of wall has cracked. He nods, unconcerned. Later that same servant is dismissed quietly. Boabdil is shrinking, not in size but in confidence, his voice growing softer, his orders delayed, and worst of all, his prayers now whispered rather than recited aloud. His mother, Aisha, visits once and says nothing for 20 minutes, then simply declares, "Your father would have burned the gates before letting them knock." Boabdil says nothing. Her footsteps fade away, and with her goes whatever was left of the old dynasty's fury. Instead, Boabdil turns inward, drafting letters he will never send, writing his name over and over in the margins of scrolls, then blacking them out with a single line, as if even the ink is ashamed of him. Historians still debate whether Boabdil was truly weak or simply outmatched, whether he could have led better, or whether any leader would have faltered in his position. But the truth sits here now with you, quiet and raw. He is a man watching the sand slip through the last part of the hourglass, and no amount of dignity can slow it. You witness one of his final council meetings, held in a narrow chamber where half the lamps are unlit, and the advisors all look like funeral guests unsure whose body they're mourning. One speaks of negotiating terms, another demands the army take the offensive just once more. Boabdil listens, nods, and then says, "What do you fear more, brothers? The death of our walls or the death of our story?" No one answers. He rises, walks to the wall, and taps the tiles rhythmically 3 times. "Then let the walls die," he mutters. One advisor weeps quietly into his robe, but Granada, even in surrender, demands ceremony. There are still formalities to observe, gestures to be made. You are present when Boabdil receives the terms from Ferdinand and Isabella, written in both Arabic and Castilian, a document heavy with clauses and reassurances. They promise religious freedom, property rights, safe conduct. They even offer Boabdil a small lordship across the sea in Las Alpujarras. The paper trembles in his hands. He doesn't read it aloud. Instead, he passes it to his vizier and says, "What will they do when we ask to keep our names?" The vizier, an old man with half-blind eyes, replies, "They will say yes, then they will say no. That is how Christian mercy works." The Sultan nods. The deal is accepted in principle. The actual ceremony is scheduled for a few days hence. In those final days, Boabdil changes. Not dramatically, not in ways that would inspire paintings or legends, but in the subtle ways that only someone watching very closely would notice. He eats less. He drinks water slowly, as if each sip must be earned. He takes to walking alone at dawn through the Generaliffe gardens, where the roses are still, blooming obliviously, and the water channels gurgle with painful innocence. You see him pause to trace a single petal, whispering to it, "You will remain, I will not." He begins to visit empty rooms at night, placing his hand on the walls, on the ceilings, even on the cold floors, as if pressing his body's warmth into them, trying to leave a residue of himself behind. In one room he finds an old prayer rug left by a guard. He kneels not to pray but simply to sit, and sit, and sit. The guards stop checking on him after a while. Elsewhere, the palace staff prepares for the handover. Doors are scrubbed, silver is counted. Some hide documents in ceiling cracks, others burn them. One chamberlain writes a list of the palace's contents, then throws the list into the fire, mumbling, "Let them discover nothing in the right order." You meet a cook who says, "I'm making pigeon stew for the last time. After this they'll want beef." She laughs too hard and keeps chopping onions. You witness a final parade, organised not by Boabdil but by his most loyal soldiers, marching silently through the streets in armour that hasn't been polished in weeks, shields dulled, scimitars still sharp but carried with hands that tremble. There's no music, no chants, just boots on stone, the final echo of a military that knows it will not fight again. A little girl runs alongside them, waving a flag with the old crescent moon. No one stops her. Boabdil watches from a window. His eyes shine with something that is not quite tears. On the eve of the surrender, he meets privately with his wife. They exchange no political words, no strategy, no prayers, just memories. She tells him, "I loved you more when you were a poet." He answers, "I became a king so you wouldn't starve." She replies, "We starved anyway." They do not touch. Later that night, Boabdil goes to the lion fountain and sits on its rim, staring into the moonlit water. A servant offers him a cloak. He waves it away. "If the wind wants me cold," he says, "so be it." He closes his eyes. For hours he remains there, motionless. Somewhere in the city someone begins singing a lullaby. It carries faintly through the trees. The Sultan does not sing, he simply listens. And then, just before dawn, he returns to his chamber, dresses slowly in the robes of state, the green and gold ones worn only for Eid and coronations, and wraps a black turban over his hair. His face in the mirror is unreadable. A guard opens the door. Boabdil nods. It is time. The march begins, and now you are walking beside Boabdil as he descends the long stone path from the Alhambra toward the city's main gate, the Bab al-Sharia, his cloak brushing against dust that once saw parades of glory, his eyes locked ahead. Though everyone around him is either weeping, whispering, or simply staring in stunned silence. Because this is not just the end of a reign or even the end of a city. This is the closing breath of 8 centuries of Al-Andalus, and you feel it not in the trumpets or the terms, but in the absence of resistance, the way the air has grown so quiet that even footsteps sound like apologies. The surrender has been planned to be symbolic, smooth, and meticulously staged by the Catholic monarchs. Ferdinand and Isabella have not marched in with swords drawn. They've waited just beyond the city's edge, allowing Boabdil to perform the ritual of handing over the keys to Granada himself, as if he still has some dignity left to sacrifice, and you see him now, holding those iron keys in both hands, wrapped in white silk to keep the metal from biting his palms. And as he approaches the designated meeting point outside the city, his pace slows, not out of fear or hesitation, but something stranger, like a man preparing to speak his own eulogy. The Christian army stands in tight ranks before him, banners unfurled, crosses glittering in the morning sun, and at the front, on horseback, sit Ferdinand and Isabella, dressed not as warriors but as monarchs of Providence, solemn, still, a painting come to life. Boabdil stops 10 paces away, his entourage behind him silent and sunken, and then he steps forward alone and presents the keys with both hands extended, bowing slightly, not too deeply, not enough to signal servitude, but enough to mark submission, and Ferdinand accepts them without words, nodding once, a gesture practiced and rehearsed so many times in his mind that even now it feels less like diplomacy and more like theatre. Isabella says a quiet prayer under her breath. No translator is needed. Everyone understands what this means. A white banner bearing the cross of Castile is raised over the highest tower of the Alhambra, and as it unfurls in the cold breeze, a muffled gasp rises from those watching on both sides, Muslim, Christian, Jew, all seeing something they hoped might never happen, all knowing instantly that nothing will ever return to what it was. Some say the banner shimmered unnaturally in the sunlight. Others swear it flapped without wind. But what no one forgets is the silence that followed. No cheers, no horns, just silence. Historians still argue whether this was out of respect or hesitation, but the effect was clear. This was not a celebration, it was a burial. And now, with ceremony complete, Boabdil turns to leave, not back toward Granada, but eastward toward exile. He is granted temporary safe passage and a small domain in the mountains, a consolation prize offered more to clear him from sight than out of mercy. As he rides away from the city, his mother Aisha waits nearby, veiled and silent. She does not embrace him. Instead, she utters the words that will follow him forever. You weep like a woman for what you could not defend like a man. He does not answer, but you see it, the way his hands clench the reins, the way his eyes flicker not with anger, but shame. And yet, who among us would not break under such weight? Who among us could carry a dying kingdom on our shoulders and still hold our chin high? The path he takes will later be called El Suspiro del Moro, the Moor's Sigh, a place where, legend says, he turned one last time to look back at the red fortress glowing in the sun and sighed. Whether this actually happened, no one knows. But the sigh has become more famous than the man. You continue walking through the city now, a place that is both conquered and eerily unchanged. The streets still twist in their old ways, the fountains still trickle, children still chase each other around the courtyards. But the language is shifting. Signs are being repainted. Arabic calligraphy is being plastered over. And outside the great mosque, soldiers begin measuring the foundations, preparing to convert it into a cathedral. Inside, the imam has already packed his scrolls and extinguished the lamps. We are no longer heard here, he says, only watched. His voice echoes unnaturally. You step into a public square where Christians are reading proclamations in Spanish. They announce that all Muslims who wish to remain may do so, so long as they convert, pay taxes and abide by new rules. The crowd listens in stony silence. One man spits on the ground. A child asks, "What does convert mean?" And his mother pulls him away. A priest offers blessings in broken Arabic. No one responds, but some already understand what's coming. In a bathhouse near the city's edge, a woman burns her old clothes and whispers prayers into the steam. "Better they forget I was ever here," she says. A merchant buries his Quran in his garden and plants onions over it. So it will grow again, he jokes, but no one laughs. You walk into a scribe's house where ink still stains the floor. He's copying Castilian grammar books now. New tongue, new chains, he mutters, but at least I still write. On the Alhambra's towers, Christian guards take up positions staring down at the city they have inherited like men inspecting a strange heirloom they don't understand. One jokes, "Nice place, bit too many arches." His comrade shrugs. "Give it a few years, we'll straighten them out." Even the pigeons seem confused, circling lower than usual. In one alley you see a young boy drawing stars in the dust with his finger. "These ones are ours," he says, "but they don't know they've been taken yet." And perhaps he's right. Perhaps Granada itself doesn't yet realize what's happened. A body can keep breathing for a while after the heart stops, a city too, but the pulse is gone. The music that once poured from open windows, the debates held in moonlit gardens, the songs of lovers and poets and astronomers, all have gone quiet. And in that silence the sound of marching boots grows louder each day. The gates of Granada are still open, but not for return, only for exit. And as Boabdil disappears into the hills and the cross rises higher over the mosque, you are left with one undeniable truth, heavy and eternal. Islam has fallen in Europe. Not with fire, but with a silence so deep it still echoes in the bones of the city. You are still here, weeks after the surrender, and though technically the transition was declared peaceful, you begin to notice the thin, bitter flavour that settles into the air like old smoke, the kind that doesn't sting immediately, but eventually coats your throat and clings to your skin. Because what comes after the fall of a city is not silence, but policy. And the policies here arrive like shadows stretching across the floor just before dusk, slowly, steadily, and always cold. At first, the people are told their customs may remain. Mosques will not be touched. The Quran will not be taken. The muezzin may call to prayer. The Arabic language may be spoken in public and in school. These promises are spoken aloud from church steps and posted at street corners in both Arabic and Castilian, signed by Ferdinand and Isabella themselves. And the people, what choice do they have? They nod, they bow slightly, they accept, but they do not relax. You see it in the way mothers press their palms flat over their children's mouths when they speak too freely, too loudly in Arabic. You see it in how shopkeepers stop painting signs altogether, just leaving doors half open and trusting regulars to know what's inside. You see it in the mosque near the Darrow where the call to prayer grows quieter every day, not because the muezzin is less devout, but because he's started looking over his shoulder more than toward the minaret. Then one day the call to prayer stops altogether. No official order, just silence. The tower door is locked. No explanation. You meet a baker who whispers, "They test us softly first, then hard." He now sells unleavened bread just in case. Another man, a physician, is suddenly asked to prove that he studied medicine under a Christian master. "Does the disease care who I learned from?" he asks. The official shrugs. The king does. Historians still argue whether these policies were deliberately deceptive from the start or if they hardened in reaction to resistance. But on the ground, the shift is unmistakable. One by one, mosques are reclaimed. Not burned, oh no, that would be too obvious. But gently, with pomp and incense and processions that look holy on the outside but smell like conquest. First, the great mosque becomes a cathedral. Then smaller mosques are blessed, then locked, then repainted. Within months, fewer than 5 remain open. By the year's end, even they are shuttered. Islamic schools fare no better. At first, teachers are asked to submit curriculum for review, then they're told to eliminate references to the Prophet. Then Arabic itself is discouraged. Eventually only Christian-run schools are legal. You find a scholar hiding scrolls in clay jars beneath his courtyard. Like the Dead Sea, he jokes, only drier. In private, some households continue to teach Arabic, but they teach it like a secret code, not a language. One girl learns how to write her name from her grandmother's embroidery patterns. Her mother warns, "Do not even speak it in dreams." You hear a child recite a bedtime prayer in Latin, pause halfway and start crying. "I forgot how to say it in our tongue," he whispers. His father shushes him. "That means you'll survive." Even names become dangerous. Official records are rewritten. Some people alter theirs voluntarily. Yusuf becomes Jose. Fatima becomes Beatrice. Omar becomes Manuel. Others resist until they're forced. "It's only a name," one man says, "but when I hear them call me by theirs, I vanish." The concept of Morisco, a baptized Muslim, is introduced. At first it seems a compromise, convert and stay, but conversion, like everything here now, is a performance with shifting rules. New converts must attend Mass, then confession, then learn the creed by heart, then prove they've eaten pork. Some comply, others fake it. A black market for pig fat rises overnight, used not to cook, but to stain lips and pots with evidence. One old man is beaten after refusing to serve wine. "It is our law," the official declares. "But not mine," the man replies. His house is confiscated the next day. You begin to see signs on the doors, chalk crosses marked by clergy to indicate a compliant household. Those without a mark are visited more often, sometimes twice a day. An old woman whose door is clean is found crying. "They marked my house for burning," she whispers, "not blang." Meanwhile, Christians move in, not just soldiers or priests, but farmers, tradesmen, entire families resettled from the north, given homes and property in the name of repopulation. They are told this land is theirs by divine right. Some are kind, others spit in wells and claim them. In one neighbourhood, a new Christian family hangs garlic from their door. "To keep out evil," they say. "For me." Their Muslim neighbour replies, "We used to do the same thing for you." You witness a funeral where the deceased is buried quickly, quietly, without Arabic prayers. A priest watches from a distance. "No incense," he warns, "no verse." A week later, the cemetery is sealed. You overhear one gravekeeper muttering, "What they cannot erase, they pave." In the market, the old spice stalls disappear first, then the music stalls, then the bookbinders. A once vibrant culture shrinks behind closed shutters and heavy curtains. The streets lose colour. Even the laughter sounds changed, more forced, more brittle. One night a child is born and given a Christian name. His grandmother weeps not with joy, but with resignation. "So that he may live," she whispers, "even if he forgets who he is." You see people crossing themselves not from faith but habit, like blinking in sunlight, like coughing in smoke. You begin to wonder if memory can be smothered so slowly that it mistakes itself for transformation. But not everyone adapts. In the mountains, rumours spread of rebel bands, groups of Moriscos who refuse conversion, who hide in ravines, who carry their books in sacks and say prayers into the stone. They become ghosts, legends, threats. The Christians call them bandits. The Muslims call them the breath that did not die. One letter intercepted by guards describes a dream in which the Alhambra reopens to the call of the Adhan, to the scent of rosewater, to the verse of Surah Rahman. The scribe is arrested. His hand is broken. Still the dream spreads. You find a cracked wall where someone has etched in broken Arabic, "We are still here." It is scratched over by morning, but another appears the next night, and then another, and then 100 more. You now live inside a city that wears a mask so well, even its own reflection in the Darrow River no longer recognizes it, because outwardly Granada appears peaceful. The cobbled streets remain swept. The markets continue to hum with cautious trade. The Alhambra still glows with sunset light as if nothing ever changed. But inside the homes, behind every neatly latched door and tightly shuttered window, a new way of life is taking shape, a layered, coded, silent form of survival that forces every Morisco to become an actor, a linguist, and a spy in their own skin. And as you move from house to house, alley to alley, you begin to see how deeply performance has replaced truth. Meals are now carefully prepared with both olive oil and lard on separate spoons, one for tradition, the other for inspection. Water jugs are painted with crosses to pass as Christian, even if the hands that fill them still whisper the Bismillah under their breath. Mothers hum lullabies in Castilian while secretly teaching their toddlers Arabic letters written in dust on the back of cabinets, erasing them before anyone else sees. Entire families now pray not facing Mecca, but facing whatever wall is farthest from the street, so that if someone peers through the window, it looks like they're looking for a dropped spoon. And yes, the Christian inspectors come, not always in armour, often just in robes, smiling, pretending to be curious or neighbourly, but always watching. They count how many times someone attends Mass, they sniff cooking pots, they examine children's toys for hidden script. One inspector lifts a girl's doll and finds a tiny stitched crescent on the hem of its dress. The family says it's decorative. The inspector leaves. The doll disappears that night. Historians still argue whether these inquisitorial visits were part of a formal policy at this stage or just growing cultural paranoia, but the effect was the same. People no longer knew what was allowed, so they simply tried to do nothing at all. A Morisco school opens briefly, trying to teach sewing and arithmetic in Spanish, while quietly passing down grammar rules from Al-Khalil and Ibn Malik. It is shut within a month. The teacher is taken away. Her house is sealed with red wax, her students scatter, some fleeing to the mountains, others pretending they never knew how to read in the first place. You see boys burning poetry they wrote only the night before, girls pulling off their mother's old jewellery and burying it under floorboards. One man digs up his father's astrolabe, touches it once, then hurls it into a ravine. "We don't need stars to tell us where we're going," he mutters. And yet, despite all this, the city clings to itself in secret. Weddings are still held in cellars, prayers are whispered into pillows, fasting continues during Ramadan, disguised as illness or diets. Some houses keep both calendars side by side, Gregorian for the officials, Hijri for the heart. A tailor shows you a coat stitched with Quranic verse so small it looks like decoration. He will wear the words without them knowing, she smiles. But her smile is tired. One evening you attend what appears to be a birthday feast. There is lamb, figs, cinnamon bread. The guests speak Spanish, laugh politely, make toast to saints, but after the meal the candles are dimmed, the tablecloth is turned over, and the real meal begins. A whispered recitation of Surah Maryam, a story shared about the Prophet's last sermon, a quiet exchange of dates and olives as if they are relics from a world no longer allowed to exist. One guest begins to cry not from sadness but from exhaustion. "I don't know who I am by daylight anymore," he whispers. And you realize this is the cost, not just of empire or conquest or politics, but of daily, grinding, intimate erasure. In the Al-Basin, the old Muslim quarter, many Morisco homes are now divided down the middle. One room for living as Christians, another for remembering they were ever anything else. In one house, a woman shows you a floor tile that lifts to reveal a small prayer niche. "My husband built this," she says. "He said we would only use it once a year. That way it stays sacred." But you can tell it has been used every night. Still, not everyone submits. In the mountains beyond the city, rebel cells grow. Young men disappear from towns and return months later lean, silent and trained. They carry messages written in lemon juice. They organize secret routes through olive groves. They call themselves Al-Sabirun, the patient ones. One of them tells you, "We do not want war, we want memory." Another adds, "But if we must choose, we will fight for that too." Down in the city, some of their relatives are arrested. Some vanish. Others pretend not to recognize them. One family turns in, their own son hoping to spare the rest. They are spared nothing. The repression intensifies. Laws are passed requiring all Moriscos to dress like Christians, then to marry only Christians, then to keep their doors open on feast days to prove they aren't observing their own. Inspectors now demand that kitchens be checked weekly. Some use dogs to sniff for unfamiliar spices. A widow is beaten because her oven still smells of harira soup. Wrong smell, they say. She never cooks again. Music changes too. Traditional instruments are banned. The oud is called too Eastern, the rebab too suspicious, the drum too tribal. A boy caught humming a maqam is whipped. Afterward, he sings only Latin hymns badly. It hurts their ears, he says. That's the revenge, some rebel with silence. A stonemason begins carving only blank slabs. So they cannot erase what isn't there, he explains. One elderly calligrapher starts teaching Christian children how to draw birds. In every wing he hides a letter. Maybe someday someone will spell us back. You meet a girl who collects broken ceramics from old mosques and reassembles them into patterns that make no sense. She says, "These were once our names, now they're just shapes." She places them on her rooftop where they glint under moonlight. And every now and then, when the wind is right, the fragments hum, not loud, not for long, but enough. Enough to remind you that even crushed things carry echoes. You find yourself waking in a city that has grown strangely efficient at forgetting what it used to be, where the streets no longer carry the scent of spiced bread or the rhythms of oud melodies echoing off the courtyard walls. And though the tiles remain on the Alhambra and the Arabic calligraphy still twists across its columns like vines of poetry turned to stone, the people beneath it are slowly being rewritten, for this is the chapter when false peace gives way to official betrayal. When Granada's Moriscos, those Muslims who converted, willingly or not, are told that even obedience is no longer enough, because now the state no longer wants their cooperation, it wants their total erasure, starting with their language, their habits, their weddings, their dreams, and above all their names, and you can feel it in the way neighbours avoid eye contact. How doors are closed even in daylight, and how church bells now seem to ring not just to mark the hour, but to drown out anything else that might still live in memory. It begins with a decree that Arabic is no longer permitted, not in rhyme, not in speech, not even in lullabies sung to babies, and you witness the first enforcement of the ban when a school teacher is publicly humiliated for possessing a manuscript of Kalila wa Dimna hidden inside the binding of a Latin grammar book. And though he pleads that he only reads it for allegory, not faith, the Inquisition rules it heretical, and he is sentenced to lashes before being banned from teaching ever again. His pupils stop speaking altogether. In another home, a grandmother burns her entire dowry chest. Scrolls, calligraphy tools, letters, even a lock of hair from her mother, just to prevent her grandchildren from knowing too much. If they remember, they'll be punished, she says, so let them forget. You see children start to fear their own parents, watching them for slip-ups, correcting them when a Muslim phrase slips out, even reporting them to priests in hopes of winning favour. One boy tells a friar that his father still fasts on Fridays instead of Sundays. That man is imprisoned, the boy is praised. The mother weeps silently in the dark. Historians still debate whether this rapid escalation in repression was triggered by isolated uprisings in nearby towns or was part of a broader plan to eliminate Morisco culture from the start. But whatever the motive, the effect is clear. Survival now requires invisibility, and even perfect compliance offers no guarantee. Churches now issue weekly spiritual inspections where families must confess sins publicly, not just of action, but of thought. A woman is punished for saying Inshallah when asked if she'll attend Mass. She claims it was habit. They say habits reveal the heart. Another man, when asked to name the 12 apostles, lists 10 correctly, stumbles on the rest, and is branded insincere. His house is searched. His neighbours stop speaking to him. In a carpentry shop, a craftsman carves crosses, saints, chalices, everything requested, but is arrested when a visiting monk notices that he's used a pattern of 8-pointed stars around the edges. Moorish geometry, they claim. He tries to explain that it's just design, not doctrine. They take his tools. He's later found sweeping the cathedral steps in silence. Meanwhile, every few weeks, another Morisco village is forcibly relocated. Families are uprooted with barely a day's notice and moved to different provinces in Castile or Aragon, where they are forbidden from living near others of Morisco origin. Scatter them, the decree reads, so they do not become wind again. In some towns, entire wedding parties are arrested because they sang in a minor scale. In others, women are forced to give birth in the presence of midwives appointed by the church. To ensure no old blessings are whispered into newborn ears, you follow one priest whose job is to Christianize these births. He confesses to a colleague, "They don't cry the same way when I'm there." And still, resistance flickers, odd as open revolt, at least not yet, but in strange, fragile ways. A woman embroidering saints into robes stitches the bismillah into the hems, invisible unless you turn the garment inside out. A blacksmith hides Quranic verses inside the blades of ploughs. A boy creates a coded language where Arabic letters are replaced with bird drawings. His notebooks are passed secretly from child to child, like treasure map leading to a forgotten country. And always, behind it all, the fear. You meet a man who hasn't spoken aloud in months. "Words are evidence," he says. "I will leave them behind." A merchant keeps a jar of ashes labelled memories. When asked what they contain, he answers, "mistakes." The Inquisition becomes more bold, more thorough. Secret prisons are now common, where suspects are held without charges, interrogated not just about their own practices, but about others. Some break quickly, others hold out. One man refuses to name a neighbour. He is executed. That neighbour is arrested anyway. Stories like these multiply. You begin to feel that time itself has changed, longer, heavier, like a rope being pulled too slowly through a closing gate. The Catholic monarchs are dead now, but their legacy lingers in every parchment, every whispered order, every priest's narrowed gaze. Charles V rules now, a Holy Roman Emperor with a throne in Madrid and eyes on every shadow. He issues new edicts, harsher ones. Converts must now prove their loyalty not just with behaviour but with blood. Marriages are tracked, baptisms monitored, entire family trees inspected for purity. You stand in a square where bloodline records are read aloud like criminal charges. One woman, descended from scholars of Cordoba, is told her lineage raises concerns. Her family is exiled, no explanation, just a cart, a map, and a road that leads away. In the countryside, rumours swell of Moriscos forming alliances with Muslims in North Africa, or even the Ottomans. Some of it is true, much of it isn't, but it's enough to tighten the noose further. New surveillance systems are developed, priests who masquerade as merchants, informants embedded in every neighbourhood. A man who owned a perfume shop is arrested for selling rosewater. A scent of the Orient, the judge declares, a tool of resistance. The man is hanged. His shop is converted into a tavern, but the rose scent lingers for weeks. Even Christian citizens begin to question what they see. A teacher who once defended the edicts now admits, "I used to think we were saving their souls, but we've only taught them how to vanish." In one chapel, a monk confesses that he found a Morisco child carving verses into the underside of a pew. He covered it with a rug. "I wanted to believe it was poetry," he says, "not faith." But it was both. It always was. You walk through a plaza where pigeons still gather and children still play. But the pigeons no longer coo in Arabic. The children no longer know what the arches were for. One girl points to a stone basin and asks if it's a bird bath. "It was for wudu," her grandmother says, then goes quiet. You stand at the edge of this world listening for the voices that once filled these streets, and you realise they haven't gone completely. They've just learned to whisper in places no one thinks to check, in the spaces between cobblestones, in the curls of old woodwork, in the echo of a name mispronounced deliberately. They are still here, just quieter. You're no longer in the tight stone streets of Granada, but climbing steep rocky paths into the Alpujarras, where pine forests hum with wind and silence, and the stones beneath your feet are slick not just with morning dew, but with the tread of countless hidden feet that came before you. Families, fighters, and fugitives who refused to be swallowed by the silence of the city, who escaped the sermons and inspections to gather here, in these remote hills, with nothing left to lose except their memory and each other. This is where the embers of rebellion begin to glow again, not with banners or declarations, but with whispers passed between shepherds, with coded songs sung from one peak to the next, and with the scent of freshly baked flatbread rising from earthen ovens buried into the mountain slopes. It begins small, as most fires do. A stolen horse here, a garrison raided there, officials vanish, letters never arrive. A tax collector is ambushed and left tied to an olive tree with verses from Surah al-Baqarah pinned to his chest. The crown dismisses these as banditry, but those who live here know better. They call it La Voz Morisca, the Morisco voice returning after years of forced silence. And that voice is no longer asking, it is warning. You follow a young man named Faraj, born in the city, baptized by force, but educated by mountains. He leads a small group of exiles, all armed with hunting knives, rusted spears, and nothing else except memory. Faraj speaks little. His orders are given in gestures. His men move like ghosts. One is a former mason who carved secret passages beneath Granada's streets. Another was a calligrapher who now uses his steady hand to carve maps into animal hides. They strike at night, leaving behind messages etched into church doors. We are not gone, or faith is not paper. And then they vanish again. Charles V grows alarmed. Reports of rebellion multiply. Troops are dispatched. Villages are searched. But the mountains do not surrender their secrets easily. The terrain is brutal. Sharp ridges, deep ravines, forests so thick you can lose your own shadow in them. Soldiers grow tired. Some defect, others begin burning entire hamlets in frustration, and that is when rebellion becomes war. In 1568, under Philip II Charles's successor, the pressure reaches a boiling point. The Moriscos of the Alpujarras rise in open revolt. Not just raids, not just sabotage, this is organized, bloodied, desperate resistance. The rebel leader is a young man named Hernando de Cordoba, known among his people as Aben Humeya. He is descended from the last Muslim king of Granada, and though he was raised a Christian, forced to speak Spanish and trained in court manners, he returns to these mountains to reclaim the name his ancestors once carried in daylight. He declares himself king of a free Morisco Granada. His followers pledge allegiance with tears and swords. They burn churches, attack Christian settlers, and try to reclaim lost villages. You follow Aben Humeya through narrow canyons and cold ridges, where he delivers speeches not with grandeur, but with fury. They took our prayers, our words, our weddings, our dead, he says. Now we take back the soil. He wears robes stitched with old Quranic motifs and armour, taken from a Spanish captain. His court is a circle of rocks beneath an oak tree. His messengers carry coded messages inside pomegranate seeds, and his war spreads fast. For 2 years, the crown struggles to suppress this rebellion. Armies are sent again and again, cities tremble. The Alpujarras become a battlefield of smoke and echo. Some Christians flee their homes. Others join the army with renewed hatred. Villages are wiped clean. One town is reported to be reborn with fire. Historians still argue whether this rebellion could ever have succeeded, or whether it was always doomed to fail under the weight of Spain's military superiority and European alliances. But for a while, in the dark and tangled terrain of the mountains, it feels like a kingdom reborn. But then the cracks begin. Aben Humeya is assassinated, some say by his own followers, others say by rival Morisco factions, jealous or suspicious of his mixed loyalties. Leadership splinters. The Spanish crown appoints Don Juan of Austria. Yes, the half-brother of Philip II, the same Don Juan who would later fight at Lepanto to crush the rebellion. Don Juan brings a brutal, systematic strategy. He doesn't just chase fighters. He evacuates entire regions, clears villages, resettles loyal Christian peasants in their place. Families are torn apart, children disappear. Whole populations are marched out of the mountains and dispersed across Castile, Valencia, and even Galicia. Like dust scattered across stone, one priest writes in his diary. A young girl is found writing her mother's name into the dirt over and over because she was too young to remember her face. You stand in the ruins of a Morisco village, its walls still warm from fire, and feel the ash clinging to your sandals. Among the cinders, someone has carved a single word into a rock. Still. That's all. Just still. No flag, no cry, just that one stubborn word. After 1571, the revolt is officially declared crushed. Aben Abu Humya's cousin, who tried to carry on the resistance, is betrayed and killed. His head is sent to the king. Don Juan writes that peace has returned. But when you speak to the villagers in the plains below, you see that peace has a different meaning here. It means no one speaks Arabic anymore. It means cemeteries are unmarked. It means that songs no longer rise from the olive groves. It means that silence is now the only permitted memory. The Albulleras never fully recover. The people are changed, the land is scarred. A shepherd tells you, "These hills remember better than we do." He touches the bark of an old chestnut tree. "This one knew prayers before I was born." You don't ask him what kind, you just listen. Because that's what the mountains do now. They listen. They carry echoes. And sometimes, if the wind is right, they answer back. You pass a spring whose waters were once used for ritual washing. Now, a cross stands over it. But the water still tastes of pine and stone and something else, something deeper. You cup your hands and drink. For a moment you taste time, then it's gone. You now stand in the shadow of a silence that feels heavier than war ever did, because the battles are officially over. The rebels are dead or scattered. The mountains are quiet again. But what follows is not peace, not even a return to cruelty in its overt form, but something far more suffocating. A slow clinical suffocation by law, paperwork, ritual and records, where everything that once defined Morisco identity is gradually not burned, but reclassified, repurposed, mistranslated, and finally forgotten, so that you are not destroyed violently but gently erased, name by name, habit by habit, until even the word Morisco becomes a label for suspicion, a red mark on paper, a whisper in a registry office, and the Spain you now inhabit, under King Philip II, and soon to be governed by countless local inquisitors, scribes and clerics, becomes a place where you survive only by pretending you never existed in the first place. It begins with the dispersals after the Alpujarras' rebellion, as thousands of Moriscos, many of them born and raised in Granada, in villages where Arabic poetry had once been recited beside fountains under olive trees, are forcibly relocated across Castile, Aragon, Extremadura, and even Galicia, deliberately scattered so that no more than a handful ever live near each other again. A policy not of punishment but prevention, designed to ensure that never again could songs become slogans or neighbours become allies. Families are split, children are lost, elders die on the road. In the town of Hornacos, a boy writes his cousin's name into the wooden underside of a wagon. "So I don't forget him," he says. The ink fades before the journey ends. When these exiled communities arrive at their new destinations, they are met not with hospitality, but with suspicion. Local Christians see them as enemies of the crown. Officials